I watched a lot of hockey this year, and one team that I've watched a lot of is Carolina. And I've watched a lot of Carolina because at the start of the year, I was very clear in my belief that Carolina was probably the least likely team to turn it around this year. I took some heat for it because a lot of people saw a young, hungry team. Well, right now, what's making the rounds is Coach Bill Peters stating that he feels Eddie Lack isn't a very good goaltender. This has become news. Eddie Lack has the 60th rated save percentage among 60 goaltenders of the starters and backups in the NHL. Eddie Lack has honestly not been very good. Here's the thing. Eddie Lack had a good rookie season. The last year he was in Vancouver, he was winless for months. And friends of mine and I would talk at work, and I'd say, well, who's in net? And they'd say Lack. And I'd say, okay, so the Canucks don't want to win tonight. That's what I would say. Oh, Lack's playing, so we lose. And then we would. And Lack's numbers were awful. Then Lack turned it on, played really, really well. The Canucks get in the playoffs. Lack stumbles. Miller's thrown in, and all the fans were all crying. Why'd Ryan Miller go in? Lack's a better goalie than Miller. Why do we have Miller at all? Miller's old and expensive. The same argument that was made about Roberto Luongo. We can keep Raycroft. We can keep Schaefer. We can keep whoever. Whoever the backup was at the time, Canuck fans would say, we can keep this guy. We don't need Luongo. Luongo costs too much money. It's the same argument with Miller. So Lack walks as, the Canucks traded him for, I think it was a second and a third to Carolina because he wasn't going to be coming back anyways. And Canuck Nation went nuts. CDC goes nuts. Eddie. Here's the thing with Eddie Lack. Eddie Lack is a very popular player. He's a very down-to-earth guy. He's a great guy. He's a fun guy. He's got a great sense of humor. He is not above self-deprecating humor. He has fun when he plays hockey, and you can tell he's having fun. And you can tell he's a great guy to have around. And everybody roots for Eddie for that reason. And he's had stretches where he's been a very good goaltender. So he goes to Carolina, and Canuck fans expect, oh boy, he's going to be good. He's going to challenge Cam Ward. And last year's numbers were middling. He was bad the first half of the season, and he picked it up. And I noticed, okay, so this is a trend for Eddie. He starts out really poorly, and then he builds himself up the second half of the year to keep his job. And because some players are like that, they just start slow. This year, he's only been in 9 games to this point, and his stats are bad. And I've watched a couple of his starts, and I've winced at goals that have gone in on him. I've winced. And that happens. It's happened to me with Freddie Anderson. It's happened to me with Markstrom. It's happened to me with certain goalies that I'm like, man, you got to save that. And Eddie Lack is in a position where he may find himself in Vegas next year, not as an expansion pickup. There's no way they're picking him up. But Lack may end up in Vegas as a trade at the draft table. Vegas may pick him up for a 4th, 5th round draft pick. Because he needs a change. Clearly, the organization has no faith in him. They're willing to keep throwing Cam Ward in net until he sweats to death, rather than put Lack in there because they know it's a loss. And it's been stunning because he came over to the NHL as a free agent signing for the Canucks. It was seen as kind of a win, major win. And the first year he looked like a steal. And again, the most popular player on a team is the backup goalie. I think it was, I know I've heard Glenn Healy say it. I've heard other people say it too, and it's true. Think about your favorite team right now. Not Minnesota. No, Darcy Kemper is not your favorite player. But if you've got a team with a good backup, aren't you rooting for him? Aren't you rooting for him to turn it around? Aren't you thinking, you know what? If this guy can just get a break and play 3 or 4 games in a row, he can do this. Even Bernier in Anaheim has had starts that he's been good this year. And maybe he can turn it around. Toronto, McElhinney. McElhinney be very popular with the Leafs because he's a backup. And he's capable of going on short runs of very, very good goaltending. Eddie Lack is not a starting goaltender. Eddie Lack is one of those guys, and there are plenty of them over the years that I've watched come over. A good example for me, Edmonton fans will remember UC Markkanen. Markkanen was a half-decent goaltender. No, not a bad goaltender. But he didn't have staying power, and he found himself out of the NHL. And he just wasn't quite good enough. Montreal. Andre Rasico became known as Red Light Rasico. That was the nickname that Don Cherry gave him. And once Cherry started showing it, and Montreal fans were booing him. Rasico wasn't a very good goaltender, but he did have some good starts the first time he came up, and Raw was hurt. Rasico had a .500 record, and he had some good starts. And I genuinely thought he was going to be a decent goaltender. And then his confidence got shot. Vancouver, Peter Scooter. Peter Scooter was another goaltender that I thought played well, but the Canucks just wouldn't give him a break. They just wouldn't allow it. There's no break being given to Peter Scooter. These things happen. And right now it's Eddie Lack. And when your coach is coming out and going, can't play this guy. Not if we want to win. What are the options? So for Lack, it's probably going to be Vegas, or he's going to end up back in Europe. And, as much as we feel bad for a guy who gets called out publicly, it's part of the game. It's part of the sport. It's part of any sport. Your coach, you're going to have one or two kinds of coaches, either the kind that keeps everything in the room or the kind who's willing to say things publicly. In Peter's case, he may be frustrated because he may realize this season is another bad season and he may be out of a job. Because Lord knows Carolina's not going to fire the GM, so that puts the onus on Peters. And when Peters is looking at his bench and going, the GM hasn't given me the players I need to make the playoffs, he's going to get frustrated and say things. Especially when it's not the first year he's been the coach, and the team is no closer to being a Stanley Cup contender now, or even a Stanley Cup playoff team, than they were when he got there. Carolina has some nice parts. Carolina has some fantastic pieces. But when I watch a Hurricanes game, I can't help but feel like the half-empty arena, the youth on that lineup, this team is ripe for a move. They are ready for a move. And I don't know if it's going to be another city in North Carolina that they move to, or if the NHL is going to do in Atlanta, pull the plug, and move them to Quebec. I know everybody was expecting Seattle, but maybe Seattle gets an expansion team and the Hurricanes go to Quebec. But it's rough to watch that whole franchise, and I feel for Peters as much as I feel for Lack. So, as a former Canuck, I love Eddie Lack. I do. I even wouldn't mind if the Canucks brought him back on a tryout next year to see if he could come in and be the backup for Markstrom. Lack and Markstrom were a goaltending tandem in Sweden. We were kind of excited to see them together, and we're kind of surprised when it was Miller that stayed instead of Lack. Because Lack and Markstrom are friends, and they seem to have really good chemistry as starter and backup, and it would have been fun to see how that works out. So let me know in the comments below what you think. Is Lack out of the NHL? Probably. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Canucks gave him a tryout in the fall. It's going to depend on Demko. Is Demko ready to be a backup? Is he not? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. It is a popular thing to do. I didn't use Mr. Whiteboard here for this video. Not necessary. But I use it. And the whiteboard is for you people, and it is for me, and it is for all. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you all again soon.